Hey everyone. Tonight we begin with a man laughing as his skin peels. He's not insane, he's just out of morphine, soaked in jungle rain, chewing benzodrine like it's candy. His pulse races, his rifle jams, and the very air around him hums as if the island itself is alive. He swears the trees are whispering his name. But this isn't a nightmare. This is the Pacific. 1943. Here, American soldiers fought two enemies, the Japanese they could see, and the madness they couldn't escape. Morphine numbed the pain. Benzodrine erased sleep. And together, they built an army of hallucinating ghosts marching through fever and rot. Some prayed for rescue, others begged for overdose. Most just stared into the relentless rain, waiting for it to stop, knowing it never would. So tell me, would you take the shot or face the fever raw? Drop your answer below. And if this glimpse into a forgotten hell shook you, like, share, and subscribe to keep these stories breathing. You are there. The ramp of the landing craft drops with a metallic groan, a sound that echoes in the heavy air, almost swallowed by the island's relentless hum. You step onto the shore, your boots sinking immediately into something soft, something yielding. It's not quite sand, not quite solid ground, but a thick, dark mixture of decaying leaves, mud, and ancient earth. The first thing that hits you isn't the enemy, not the crack of a distant rifle, but the smell. It's deep, pervasive, a complex tapestry woven from rot and life and the acrid tang of gasoline. You breathe it in, and it feels thick in your lungs, almost palpable, as if the air itself is a living entity trying to fill every empty space within you. It smells like something that was once alive, now transforming, decomposing, and something else, something primal and ancient, ready to consume everything in its path. Your training was rigorous, relentless. It prepared you for men. It taught you to identify targets, to move through urban landscapes, to survive in harsh, barren terrains. But it never prepared you for an island that felt as though it wanted to eat you alive. Here, the ground itself seems hungry, a malevolent force every step you take. The mud reaches up, clinging to your boots, trying to swallow them whole, pulling at your calves as if it craves the very skin beneath your uniform. It's a constant, exhausting battle just to move forward, each foot weighing far more than it should, each step a deliberate, agonizing lift from the tenacious grasp of the earth. The sounds of the jungle press in from every side. The insects here don't merely buzz, they scream. Their collective cry is a high-pitched, vibrating hum that penetrates your skull. Louder, more insistent, more alien than any artillery shell you've ever heard. It's a chorus of unseen life, a cacophony suggesting an entirely different, more ancient battle is always raging, and you've merely stumbled into its periphery. The air is so thick with moisture, so heavy with heat, that it feels like a physical weight on your shoulders, pressing down, sapping your strength with every breath. You feel the sweat trickle down your back, a constant stream that has no hope of evaporating in this suffocating humidity. Ahead, you see a sergeant, a man whose humor has always been his shield. He offers a grim joke, his voice strained. At least in hell, it's dry. A moment later, his foot slips, and he plunges into a murky pit, disappearing momentarily before scrambling out, covered in a slimy, putrid muck. He laughs, but it's a hollow, ragged sound, a surrender to the absurd, horrifying reality. In that moment, you understand this place has its own rules, its own unforgiving nature. Before you even glimpse a single enemy soldier, the heat begins to take its toll. Your vision might blur, your head might throb, a profound weakness spreading through your limbs. Men around you, hardened by training, collapse from heat stroke, their bodies unable to cope with the oppressive, suffocating embrace of the jungle. They fall, not to bullets, but to the sheer, relentless will of the environment. The unspoken welcome phrase, passed from weary veterans to new arrivals, whispers through the ranks like a chilling mantra, "Welcome to the Pacific. God forgot this place on purpose." And as you stand there, soaking wet, mud-stained, and already exhausted, you begin to understand why. This island, this breathing, hungry entity, feels like a living hell, and you are its reluctant guest. You look up, but the sky is a permanent, impenetrable ceiling of dense green canopy. The rain doesn't fall here in polite, discreet drops. It leaks. It seeps from everywhere, a constant, insidious dampness that knows no boundary. It drips from the broad, waxy leaves above, cascades down the slick trunks of ancient trees, and wells up from the soggy ground beneath your feet. It isn't just external. It feels as if it leaks from within your very skin, a pervasive moisture that clings to you, refusing to be shaken off. The air itself seems saturated, a heavy, liquid presence that fills your lungs with every breath, making each inhalation a thick, damp effort. The veterans call it liquid air, and you quickly understand why. It's not just water. It's an atmosphere of inescapable wetness, heavy and suffocating. This relentless dampness is more than an inconvenience. It's an enemy that works tirelessly, silently, without a single shot fired. It soaks into your uniform, leaving you perpetually chilled despite the oppressive heat. It permeates your equipment, turning your carefully maintained rifle into a rusting, unreliable tool. You watch as metal surfaces bloom with orange and brown patches, the mechanisms stiffening, the firing pin less eager to strike. This liquid air seems to melt men, not physically, but spiritually, eroding their resolve, their comfort, their very sense of self. The constant chill, the unending damp, the feeling of never being truly dry, it grinds you down, slowly, inexorably. The medical reports begin to tell a grim story, a pattern as predictable as the sun not rising in this perpetually overcast world. Every 3 days, it seems, someone in your unit is struck down by malaria, the fever arriving like an invisible internal storm. You watch them shiver uncontrollably, their teeth chattering despite the humid heat, their bodies racked by a deep, aching cold. Their eyes become glazed, their skin clammy, and a profound weakness takes hold, stealing their strength, their focus, their very presence of mind. And every week, another soldier is evacuated, not for a bullet wound, but for the insidious effects of this environment. Their skin, constantly damp, constantly chafed, constantly exposed to unseen pathogens, begins to rot. Ulcers bloom like gruesome flowers, fungal infections spread, and the flesh itself seems to slowly give way, succumbing to the relentless assault of moisture and microorganisms. The Japanese soldiers, masters of this hidden terrain, have their own grim nickname for the jungle. A phrase whispered in the shadows, the invisible ally. They understand its power, its cunning, its role as a killer that needs no bullets, no bayonets, no bombs. It is an ally that works tirelessly on their behalf, weakening the enemy, breaking their spirit, preparing them for an easier end. In this perpetual state of wetness, the desperate search for something, anything, dry becomes a consuming obsession. You witness the macabre sight of soldiers, driven by the sheer need for a moment of respite from the damp, hanging their sodden clothes over the rigid, cold forms of fallen comrades. These silent, still figures, impervious to sweat and rain, are the only surfaces that offer any hope of keeping fabric from absorbing yet more moisture. It's a chilling testament to the utter desperation of the situation, a dark humor born of necessity. You hear a soldier, his voice raspy with a cough, muttering, "The rain doesn't fall here, it hunts." And as you feel the cold, persistent drops trickling down your neck, seeping into the collar of your uniform, you can't help but feel a primal fear that the rain indeed has a malevolent purpose, a sentient will, seeking you out, trying to wear you down, to claim you for the island. You carry it close, a small, precious glass syringe, tucked away in a waterproof pouch. Its contents, a promise of temporary oblivion. It is an object of reverence, almost holy in its potential. This small dose of morphine, an ampule of concentrated relief, represents a momentary escape from the relentless, grinding reality of this place. You've been told medics are supposed to control them, to administer them only when absolutely necessary, to manage the supply with clinical precision. But here, in this suffocating jungle, necessity is a fluid concept, and the lines of control blur and eventually disappear altogether. Soon enough, everyone learns the art of self-salvation, the quiet, clandestine ritual of finding solace in the blessed needle. You watch as a man, his face contorted in agony from a venomous bite, fumbles for his syringe. He plunges it into his thigh, a grimace of pain momentarily crossing his features, replaced by a slow, slackening relaxation. Then, almost immediately, he pushes a second one. His eyes, previously wide with fear and suffering, soften, unfocusing slightly as the drug begins its work. He whispers, his voice slurring, "I think I'm the snake now." And in that moment, you understand the profound power of this small vial. The pain, the raw, visceral pain that had threatened to consume him, simply fades. Not completely, but enough to be manageable, enough to recede into a distant hum. The jungle's incessant, overwhelming voice, the screams of insects, the drips of water, the rustle of unseen life, which moments before was a terrifying cacophony, now seems to take on a gentle, almost soothing quality. It's a profound shift, a momentary truce with the hostile environment. Initially, morphine is for wounds, for the sudden, traumatic injuries that are a constant threat. A bullet, a machete cut, a nasty fall onto jagged rocks. But as the days bleed into weeks, and weeks into months, the definition of a wound begins to expand. The emotional wounds, the psychological scars of unrelenting fear and exhaustion, become just as debilitating as any physical injury. You see men injecting not for a bullet in their arm, but for the gnawing dread in their gut, for the pervasive fear of what tomorrow might bring, for the sheer, suffocating weight of this existence. It's a preventative measure, a desperate attempt to fortify the mind against the coming torment. a small shot to numb the existential ache. The supplies are never enough. They dwindle rapidly, consumed by a collective desperation for peace, for quiet, for an hour of oblivion. When your own supply runs out, or when a comrade is no longer able to use theirs, a new, grim hunt begins. You find yourself searching the bodies of the fallen, your fingers cold and numb, for a half-used surette, a discarded ampule, anything that might offer a fleeting reprieve. It's a macabre scavenger hunt, a testament to the primal need for escape, even if that escape is brief and comes at such a terrible cost. The morphine, once a tool of medical aid, becomes a currency of survival, a shared secret among men clinging to the edges of sanity, a fragile bridge over the abyss of pain and fear. The blessed needle promises not only to ease the body's suffering, but to quiet the terrified, screaming mind, even if only for a few precious, fleeting moments. You hold the small, white pill in your palm, a seemingly innocuous tablet, yet it carries the promise of superhuman endurance. This is benzedrine, an amphetamine issued discreetly by the Army. Initially intended for pilots on grueling missions and for night patrols needing to maintain razor-sharp vigilance. It's meant to keep them awake, to push past the limits of human exhaustion. But in this unforgiving jungle, where sleep is a luxury rarely afforded and often violently interrupted, it quickly evolves into something more, a holy charm, a talisman against the pervasive fatigue that threatens to engulf you whole. The men call them go pills, and the name itself whispers of an impossible power. No sleep, no fear, no stopping. You swallow the pill, and for a while, nothing. Then, a subtle shift begins. The oppressive weight of exhaustion, which had settled deep in your bones, slowly begins to recede. Your mind, previously a fog of dull aches and slow thoughts, sharpens. Your senses heighten. The endless drone of insects, the ceaseless drip of rain, the unseen rustles in the undergrowth, they don't fade, but rather become clearer, almost amplified, as if you've suddenly gained a new dimension of perception. A surge of artificial energy courses through your veins, a powerful, relentless current that pushes back against the body's natural demand for rest. You feel alert, almost euphoric, capable of anything. The sheer physical agony of marching through endless mud, the stinging bites of insects, the burning discomfort of jungle rot, all of it fades into a manageable background hum. You witness a patrol, some of your own comrades, fueled by these go pills, engaging the enemy for 48 hours straight. They push through the relentless dark, through the suffocating humidity, through successive waves of Japanese attacks. Their eyes, once heavy-lidded, are now wide and staring, darting with an almost frantic intensity. You hear them whisper, convinced. The trees were watching. Not just watching, but judging, observing, perhaps even communicating. The jungle, already a malevolent presence, takes on an even more sinister, sentient quality under the drug's influence. Every rustle of leaves, every shadow, every twist of vine seems to hide a hidden meaning, a potential threat, or a profound, spiritual connection to the island itself. The boundary between enemy and environment, between reality and illusion, begins to blur until it ceases to exist. And then, the drug wears off. The artificial energy dissipates, leaving behind an even deeper chasm of exhaustion. The crash is brutal. absolute. You watch as men, who had been gods of endurance just hours before, collapse into a profound, almost coma-like sleep. They sleep for 36 hours, sometimes more, their bodies reclaiming every lost moment of rest with a vengeance. When they finally stir, slowly, painfully, their minds are often a fractured mess. There's a profound disorientation, a struggle to piece together the fragmented memories of the past 2 days. Faces are confused, names forgotten, and the grim question lingers, unspoken but felt by all. Who did I kill? What did I do? One Marine, his eyes heavy with the afterglow of a phantom invincibility, captures the essence of this experience with a chilling clarity. He murmurs, "We were gods for a day, and ghosts forever after." The Benzedrine offered a fleeting taste of power, an escape from human limitations. But the price, you realize, is a haunting, permanent detachment from the very reality you fought to preserve. You run your hand over your arm, feeling the strange, almost alien texture of your skin. The jungle, with its relentless moisture and unseen life, has turned your body into a veritable feast. It's an ecosystem of decay, where your skin, once a barrier, becomes an open invitation. Mold blooms in the folds of your uniform, its greenish-white fuzz clinging to the fabric. But it doesn't stop there. It spreads, subtle at first, then insistent onto your skin, irritating, itching, slowly taking root. Maggots, tiny white architects of decomposition, find their way into the slightest abrasion, burrowing, feeding, turning minor cuts into festering wounds, ulcers, angry red circles that weep and burn, begin to appear, blooming on your legs, your arms, your feet, like grotesque, painful flowers. And the leeches, those slimy, silent vampires of the jungle, cling to any exposed skin, swelling with your blood, leaving behind itchy, easily infected bites. But nothing compares to jungle rot. You watch in horror as it devours the feet of your comrades, turning flesh into a pulpy, putrid mess. The skin between toes, once supple, becomes macerated, then peels away, leaving raw, exposed tissue. Then the infection sets in, deep, agonizing. The pain is constant, searing, making every step a torturous endeavor. Tropical ulcers, large, weeping sores, blossom on the shins and ankles, refusing to heal in the perpetually damp environment, growing wider, deeper, consuming the flesh as if a tiny, unseen predator is gnawing from within. You can feel the constant, low-grade fever that settles into your bones, a constant reminder of the unseen microscopic war being waged inside your body. You hear the medics, their faces etched with weariness, offer the only advice they can, their voices flat with resignation. Keep it dry. The words hang in the air, absurd, cruel, utterly impossible. A wave of bitter laughter rolls through the ranks. How can you keep anything dry in a place where the rain never stops? Where your uniform is perpetually damp, where the ground itself is a sponge. Nothing is dry here. Not your clothes, not your equipment, and certainly not your skin. The joke is not truly funny. It's a desperate release, a shared acknowledgement of the tragic futility of their situation. The grim humor continues. You hear a man, his voice hoarse with pain and exasperation. Joke. I'd trade a bullet for a bar of soap. The desire for simple cleanliness, for the feel of pure, cleansing water and the scent of soap, becomes a profound yearning, a symbol of a forgotten world. Another soldier, his face hardened by weeks of this misery, replies, his voice cold. Soap doesn't kill the jungle, bullets do. And in that brutal, stark retort, you understand the depth of their despair. Soap, cleanliness, comfort, these are luxuries from another life. Here, only the blunt, violent force of a bullet seems to offer any chance of control, any hope of fighting back against the insidious, pervasive enemy that is the jungle itself. When the usual medical supplies for cleaning wounds dwindle, a new, desperate measure is adopted. You find yourself washing your wounds, your infected cuts and weeping ulcers, with gasoline. The biting, acrid smell of burnt flesh, mixed with the sharp, chemical tang of fuel, becomes a normal, almost comforting scent. It means you're fighting back, that you're doing something, however desperate, to prevent the jungle from consuming you entirely. It's a harsh, painful antiseptic, but it's all there is. When a comrade finally succumbs, not to a Japanese bullet, but to the slow, agonizing ravages of disease and infection, his uniform isn't mourned as a sacred relic. It's recycled, passed on to another, perhaps less fortunate, soul. The reason is stark. Utilitarian, still cleaner than mine. The value of a clean garment, even one stripped from the dead, outweighs sentimentality. It's a chilling reminder of the raw, brutal calculus of survival in this place where the body is in constant revolt. And the fight for cleanliness is a battle you are always losing. You squint through the relentless drizzle, your eyes straining against the dense, interlocking tapestry of green. Every shadow seems to deepen. Every cluster of leaves takes on a suspicious shape. Japanese snipers are ghosts here, masters of invisibility, melting into the foliage with an almost supernatural skill. They hide in the highest trees, patiently waiting, observing. Their presence signaled only by a sudden, sharp crack that is often heard long after the bullet has already found its mark. You hear a Marine whisper, his voice raw with fear and awe. They're not men. They're part of the trees. And you understand the sentiment. The enemy here isn't just human. It's an extension of the jungle itself, an almost indistinguishable threat that strikes from unseen angles, making every step a gamble with death. As darkness falls, the jungle takes on an even more menacing quality. The air thickens with unseen threats, and the sounds of the unseen enemy become amplified, distorted by the drug-fueled paranoia that begins to creep into your mind. Night raids are a sudden, terrifying assault on the senses. A blood-curdling scream of banzai erupts from the darkness, a primal yell designed to break your spirit and disorient your senses. It's followed by a rush of unseen figures, the flash of a bayonet, the swift, brutal violence of close-quarters combat. And then, as quickly as it began, silence swallows everything once more. The jungle reclaims its stillness, leaving behind only the cold dread of what just happened and the unsettling anticipation of what might still be lurking. The perpetual sleeplessness, fueled by benzodrine and the constant threat, begins to erode the very fabric of your perception. You watch a soldier, his eyes wide and vacant, raise his rifle and fire into the canopy. When you ask what he saw, he swears with absolute conviction that a monkey, its eyes glinting in the gloom, spoke Japanese, taunting him from the branches above. You want to dismiss it, to tell him it's just the drugs, the exhaustion. But in this place, reality has already been stretched thin, torn by the constant strain. You find yourself wondering if, perhaps, in the twisted logic of this island, the animals do speak the enemy's tongue. Another soldier, his uniform caked in mud, his face a mask of profound loneliness, spends hours talking to a corpse. Not a fresh one, but a rigid, unmoving figure from days past, its features already beginning to distort. He speaks in hushed tones, confiding secrets, sharing fears, asking questions that will never be answered. When you approach, he looks up, his eyes holding a strange, unsettling peace. He's quiet, he says, almost defensively, but he listens. The line between the living and the dead blurs. The need for connection so profound that even a silent, decaying body offers a form of companionship. This is the ultimate horror of the Pacific Jungle War. The real enemy isn't truly human. It is the jungle itself, an omnipresent, malevolent entity that systematically dismantles your sanity, bending your perception until you begin to see humans everywhere in the shadows, in the trees, in the very whispers of the wind. It makes you question every sound, every movement, every fleeting shadow. It turns your own mind against you, conjuring phantoms and whispers until the line between what is real and what is a hallucination becomes dangerously thin. You fight not only against a cunning, determined foe, but against the island's insidious power, which seeks to transform you, to break you, to make you see the world through its distorted, maddening lens. You watch your comrade, his eyes fixed on a squirming pile of maggots feasting on a decaying ration. His lips move, slowly, deliberately, as he recites lines of poetry, his voice soft, almost lyrical, a stark contrast to the horrific tableau before him. You listen, not judging, but observing. Because in this place, when everyone is high on drugs or burning with fever, the very essence of brotherhood transforms into a shared, collective insanity. The boundaries of normal behavior have long since dissolved, replaced by a strange, unsettling camaraderie forged in delirium. Your own mind, frayed at the edges, understands, perhaps even empathizes. Another man, his face smeared with dirt and grime, animatedly tells a series of jokes to an ancient, moss-covered tree. He pauses, as if expecting a punchline in return, then laughs a harsh, grating sound that seems to bounce off the dense foliage. The tree, of course, offers no response. But in his mind, it is a receptive audience, a silent confidant. These are not isolated incidents. They are common occurrences, glimpses into the fractured landscapes of minds pushed beyond endurance. In their shared madness, they invent games, dark parodies of childhood diversions. One of the most popular is the mosquito lottery. The rules are simple. Born of the grim reality they face every waking moment, whoever among them is the next to succumb to malaria. Whoever first feels the chills, the fever, the profound weakness of the jungle's silent killer, wins. Wins what no one ever really specifies. Perhaps they win the brief, blessed escape of unconsciousness, or the dubious honor of being evacuated. The prize is irrelevant. The ritual is everything. A way to acknowledge the ever-present threat with a twisted form of gallows humor. It's a way to feel a fleeting sense of control in a world where control has long been lost. You see a soldier, his face gaunt, his hands trembling, painstakingly etching symbols and words onto a broad banana leaf with a sharpened stick. His diary, he calls it, but instead of ink, he uses his own blood, a crimson script that slowly forms words on the waxy green surface. You lean closer, deciphering the fading message, Day 46, I am becoming green. The words chill you to the bone, a profound statement of transformation, of the jungle slowly, inexorably, claiming him, integrating him into its verdant, suffocating embrace. He is not merely losing his mind, he is losing his very humanity, becoming one with the environment that seeks to consume him. They laugh here, a sound that is often devoid of true mirth. It's a broken, ragged sound that escapes their throats, not because something is genuinely funny, but because there is simply nothing else left to do. Laughter becomes a release, a primal scream of despair disguised as humor, a final, desperate act of defiance against the overwhelming horror. It's a collective shrug in the face of annihilation, a shared understanding that the only way to cope with the unbearable is to find a warped, twisted form of amusement in it. And when one of them finally dies, succumbing to a bullet, a disease, or the sheer weight of it all, there is a momentary pause, a brief, silent acknowledgement of the loss. But the pause is fleeting. Then, with a grim, practiced efficiency, they divide his remaining pills, the benzedrine, the morphine, the precious small escapes from this living hell. The brotherhood of delirium, you realize, is a bond forged in shared suffering, sustained by shared madness, and ultimately sealed by the quiet, desperate ritual of scavenging from the dead. You close your eyes, seeking a brief respite from the perpetual gloom, but the darkness behind your lids offers no true escape. Instead, shapes begin to form in the mist that seems to permeate every corner of the jungle, a hazy, ethereal fog that distorts reality. Many here, pushed to the brink by exhaustion, hunger, fever, and the powerful cocktail of drugs flowing through their veins, begin to believe the jungle itself possesses a soul. It's an ancient, primal entity, and the drugs, they whisper, help them hear its voice, see its manifestations. Your own mind, constantly on the precipice, finds itself susceptible to this strange, spiritual awakening. You hear the stories, see the glazed eyes of those who have witnessed the impossible. One soldier, his face etched with a profound, almost beatific peace, recounts seeing the Virgin Mary appear in the morning mist. Her form, shimmering and translucent, seemed to float above the sodden ground, her eyes filled with an otherworldly compassion. And in her hand, he swears, she held not a rosary, but a morphine syringe, its glass glowing with an internal light. It's a vision of ultimate comfort, a sacred offering of oblivion, blending the divine with the desperately profane reality of their existence. It's a hallucination born of a desperate yearning for salvation, a desperate need for the pain to simply cease. Another dreams, vividly, powerfully, of George Washington standing atop a nearby volcano, its dormant peak seeming to rise from the jungle canopy. The founding father, a stern, resolute figure, extends his hand, offering not a parchment of liberty, but a handful of benzedrine pills. The dream is a profound connection to a bygone era of American strength, a desperate plea for the kind of unwavering resolve only these pills can provide. In their delirium, historical figures and religious icons merge with the immediate, desperate tools of survival, offering a twisted form of spiritual guidance in this God-forsaken place. The visions, however strange or terrifying, often bring a fleeting sense of power, a temporary shield against the grinding despair. "If we die here," someone jokes, a hollow laugh escaping their lips, "the jungle will draft us next." The thought is both horrifying and strangely comforting, a twisted form of immortality. If the jungle truly has a soul, if it can conjure such vivid figures and divine offerings, then perhaps death here isn't an end, but merely a transformation. Perhaps their own souls will merge with the island, becoming part of its ancient, whispering consciousness. These visions, however fleeting, make them feel immortal, immune to the bullets, the diseases, the rot. They are chosen, touched by a higher, albeit drug-induced, power. But then, the drugs begin to wear off. The fever subsides slightly, and the cruel reality of withdrawal reminds them otherwise. The divine figures fade. The comforting whispers cease, replaced by the mundane, agonizing pains of a body in revolt. The jungle, no longer a benevolent, spiritual guide, reverts to its malevolent, suffocating self. And in those moments of clarity, or rather, the return to harsh reality, the jungle itself seems to whisper, its voice insidious, seductive, chilling, "Stay, you belong to me." It is a promise and a threat, a final claim on their shattered minds and bodies. The visions, you realize, are merely a temporary enchantment, a fleeting reprieve from a destiny that seems increasingly inevitable to be consumed, body and soul, by the breathing, living, remembering jungle. The brief calm shatters. The gentle whispers of the jungle, the comforting illusions, the surge of artificial energy all dissipate, leaving behind a terrifying void. When the drugs run out, the real hell begins, a descent into a nightmare far more brutal than any battle. Your body, now accustomed to the constant presence of morphine and benzodrine, begins its violent revolt. A deep, uncontrollable shaking seizes your limbs, rattling your bones, making your teeth chatter so hard you worry they might crack. Your stomach heaves, a relentless, painful nausea that culminates in agonizing bouts of vomiting, leaving your throat raw and burning. Every vein in your body feels as if it's on fire, an invisible inferno coursing through your blood. The fever, a constant companion in this jungle, now rages with renewed intensity, blurring your vision, clouding your thoughts. Hunger gnaws at your gut, a primal ache that intensifies the agony. And terror, a cold, absolute dread, settles deep in your chest. These three tormentors, fever, hunger, terror, blend into one long, agonizing prayer for death. You yearn for the oblivion of non-existence, for the pain to simply stop, for the suffocating weight of your own body to finally give out. You see a Marine, his gaunt frame trembling so violently that he loses his grip on his rifle. It clatters to the muddy ground, a loud, jarring sound in the heavy air. Instead of scrambling to retrieve it, instead of fear or frustration, he simply begins to laugh. It's not a laugh of mirth, but a raw, hysterical sound. A broken cackle that reflects the utter, total surrender of his mind to the physical torment. His body is betraying him, and all he can do is laugh at the absurdity, the horror of it all. It's a sound that chills you, for it echoes the fragility of your own sanity. Another man, his eyes hollow with desperation, finds a discarded knife. With trembling hands, he carves 3 words into his forearm. Slowly, painfully, one more shot. The raw flesh weeps. But the physical pain is a mere distraction from the internal agony. A desperate plea for a reprieve that will never come. The mark on his arm is a testament to the insatiable craving, the profound, agonizing pull of addiction that has taken root deep within him. Many die here, not from a Japanese bullet, not from the bite of a snake or the ravages of malaria, but from their own collapsing hearts. The sheer, overwhelming stress of withdrawal, combined with starvation, disease, and relentless physical exertion, pushes their already weakened bodies beyond the breaking point. Their hearts, strained by the drugs and the constant fight, simply give out. They lie still in the mud, no external wounds, no visible cause of death, but dead nonetheless, victims of an internal war. The medical reports, sparse and grim, sometimes offer a chillingly concise explanation: killed in action by himself. It's a stark, brutal acknowledgement of the hidden enemy, the unseen battle that raged within these men, a battle they ultimately lost to the insidious power of the jungle and the cruel allure of temporary escape. You stand witness to this slow, agonizing self-destruction, knowing that at any moment your own body might join the revolt, pushing you beyond the final, terrifying edge. You are home now. The sounds of birdsong replace the scream of insects. The scent of fresh-cut grass replaces the smell of rot and gasoline. But the war, you realize, never truly ended. Few, if any, leave the jungle with their minds entirely intact. The transition from that perpetual, suffocating chaos to the quiet order of civilian life is not a seamless one. For the survivors, the incessant rain of the Pacific continues to fall, not from the sky, but within their heads, a phantom dampness that never truly dries. It's a constant, rhythmic whisper in the recesses of their minds, an echo of the unending deluge that soaked them to the bone, day after brutal day. You might see them, years later, old men sitting alone in parks. A sudden downpour begins, and while others scatter for shelter, these men remain, their faces turned skyward, a strange, hollow laugh escaping their lips. They laugh not out of joy, but out of a profound, unsettling recognition. The rain, soft and gentle on their faces, brings them back to the mud, back to the fear, back to the silent, watching trees. It's a private, visceral memory, triggered by the simplest, most mundane of natural phenomena. One veteran, his eyes holding the distant, knowing gaze of someone who has seen too much, offers a chillingly simple comparison. He murmurs, his voice raspy with age and memory. Vietnam had heroin. We had the jungle. Same damn thing. The external enemy may have changed, the geography different, but the core experience, the slow, insidious erosion of the self by an overwhelming, unforgiving environment, remained tragically the same. The jungle, with its drugs, its diseases, its ceaseless threats, was an addiction in itself, a force that took hold and refused to let go. In their dreams, night after night, the jungle still calls to them. It whispers their names. not in a foreign tongue, but in their own voices, distorted, echoing, beckoning them back into the humid embrace of its darkness. The sounds of unseen movement, the phantom smell of decay, the ceaseless drip of water, they are all there, vivid and real, refusing to be forgotten. The dreams are not merely memories, they are recurrences, visitations from a place that has claimed a part of their souls, refusing to release its grip. They wake, sometimes screaming, sometimes silent, drenched in a cold sweat, unable to shake the pervasive feeling that the jungle is still breathing just outside their window. Waiting. And perhaps, in a quiet, profound way, it is the war ended. The battles ceased. But the jungle never stopped breathing. Its influence, its presence, its enduring power to shape and haunt, lived on in the minds of those who survived it. The legacy of that place, you realize, is not just in the history books, but in the quiet moments of a veteran's life, in the sudden, unbidden laugh at the sight of rain, in the restless whispers of a dream. The jungle, in its terrifying, beautiful, and utterly unforgiving way, remembers them all. You find yourself transported, in your mind's eye, to the year 1937. Imagine the hushed, yet determined, atmosphere within the Imperial General Headquarters in Tokyo. Outside, the world is shifting, and within Japan, a deep, pervasive weariness settles over the nation. For years, you'd see the strain on faces in the bustling cities, hear the quiet laments of families, as Japan was already inextricably entangled in a brutal, costly conflict with China. This wasn't a new fight. It was a grinding, relentless struggle that had consumed resources, manpower, and the very spirit of the populace. Yet, despite this profound exhaustion, an even more powerful force burned within the leadership, a fierce, unyielding hunger for dominance. It was the ambition of an empire, a profound and deeply held vision for a grand Asian hegemony. You can almost feel the weight of this ambition, this insistent dream of a vast, self-sufficient empire stretching across Asia, a realm where Japan would stand as the undisputed leader. It was a vision born of both perceived necessity and fervent nationalist ideology. Picture the strategic maps, the long discussions, the carefully drawn lines that represented territories rich in resources, all seen as vital for the nation's future. The very air in those command rooms must have thrummed with the tension of such grand designs. Then, the global stage itself offered an unexpected opportunity, like a slow-moving cloud parting to reveal a pathway. When, in the spring of 1940, Germany swiftly conquered France, it sent shockwaves across the globe. For Japan, this event was not merely distant news, it was a profound, strategic opening. You can almost see the strategists leaning forward, their eyes tracing the map of Southeast Asia. French Indochina, a valuable colonial possession, was now vulnerable, its European master preoccupied and weakened. For Tokyo, this was an irresistible prize, not just for its own sake, but for a more immediate, tactical purpose to sever the vital supply routes that were still reaching China. Imagine the quiet satisfaction as Japanese forces moved in, occupying these territories, effectively tightening the noose around their Chinese adversaries. The resources of Indochina, too, were a tempting prospect, offering a glimpse of the self-sufficiency that their grand vision required. As these events unfolded, you might sense a growing confidence, perhaps even an audacity. taking hold within the Japanese high command. This was further solidified when Japan, in a bold move, signed the Tripartite Pact in September 1940, forging an alliance with Germany and Italy. It was a declaration, a statement of intent, echoing across the oceans. The hope, you understand, was that this formidable alliance would act as a powerful deterrent, a clear warning to any nation contemplating interference, particularly the United States. They believed that the sheer weight of such an axis of power would intimidate Washington, ensuring American neutrality while Japan pursued its destiny in Asia. But the response from across the Pacific was not the one they had anticipated. Instead of caution, a firm, decisive hand moved to counter Japan's expanding ambitions. You can almost hear the quiet fury and frustration rippling through Tokyo when Washington, in July 1941, reacted with unprecedented measures. The United States froze all Japanese assets within its borders, effectively cutting off Japan's access to vital funds. And then came the truly devastating blow, a decision that you know, even as you hear it, would have far-reaching and terrifying consequences: a comprehensive oil embargo. Imagine the shock, the stark realization that would have settled over the Japanese leadership. For a nation like Japan, heavily reliant on imported oil to fuel its industries, its navy, and its war machine, this embargo was nothing short of an economic death sentence. The calculations were grim, almost unbearable to contemplate. Within a mere 2 years, you learn, Japan would inevitably exhaust its strategic oil reserves. This dire reality presented a stark, brutal choice. Either the nation would slowly, agonizingly, starve for lack of fuel, its economy grinding to a halt, its military paralyzed, or it would be compelled to launch a desperate, all-out conquest to seize the resources it so desperately needed. You can feel the tension in the air, the immense pressure weighing down on the warlords and political leaders in Tokyo. The decision was not made lightly, but with a sense of grim inevitability. To live in submission, to allow the empire's grand vision to wither and die, was an unacceptable fate. No, they decided. It was better to die expanding, to fight for their future, to risk everything in a bold, desperate gamble, rather than to passively accept a slow, agonizing demise. The dice were cast. The quiet preparations began, setting the stage for a conflict that would forever alter the course of history. A conflict that was, by this point, slowly, inexorably, gathering its terrible momentum. As the decision hardened in Tokyo, you begin to understand the complex, almost desperate, strategy that emerged from these high-stakes calculations. Japan's leaders, facing that stark choice between economic strangulation and aggressive expansion, articulated a grand vision they called the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere. You might imagine this phrase whispered in hushed tones, written on strategic documents, spoken with fervent conviction. It was presented as a benevolent concept, an alliance of Asian nations free from Western colonial influence, all under Japan's benevolent leadership, of course. But beneath this veneer, the true objective, as you sense, was far more pragmatic and urgent: to create a vast, self-sufficient Asian empire capable of sustaining itself, immune to the economic pressures of rival powers. To achieve this ambitious, yet precarious, self-sufficiency, Japan had its eyes on very specific, resource-rich targets. You can almost trace the lines on a map as their strategists considered the crucial areas. Malaya, with its abundant rubber plantations, the sprawling Dutch East Indies, a veritable treasure trove of oil, rubber, and other vital raw materials, and the American-held Philippines, positioned strategically and also holding valuable resources. The plan was clear: these territories had to be seized, swiftly and decisively. Imagine the sheer logistics the military might required for such a sweeping series of invasions. It was a colossal undertaking, demanding every ounce of Japan's naval and military strength. Once these vital territories were secured, the next critical phase of the strategy unfolded. Japan intended to establish a formidable, fortified defensive perimeter stretching across the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean. You can picture it: a chain of islands, strategically vital atolls, and fortified bases, each acting as a shield, designed to repel any potential counterattack from the Allied powers, particularly the United States. This defensive ring was meant to be impenetrable, creating a safe harbor for Japan's newly acquired empire, allowing it the time and space to consolidate its gains and exploit its resources without interference. The concept was elegant in its ambition. A shield against the inevitable storm they knew would follow their aggressive expansion. However, this entire audacious plan rested upon one fundamental, yet ultimately flawed, assumption. You can almost hear the quiet discussions, the confidence in their voices, as the Japanese strategists articulated their belief Americans, they reasoned, would lack the fortitude, the national will, to endure a long, bloody, and incredibly costly war waged thousands of miles from their shores. They believed that a swift, decisive series of blows, particularly one that crippled the American Pacific Fleet, would so shatter American morale and capacity that Washington would quickly seek a negotiated peace. Imagine the cultural misunderstandings, the misjudgments of national character that led to such a profound miscalculation. They were betting everything on the premise that America, once wounded, would simply retreat. Meanwhile, across the Pacific, the United States was, in its own way, preparing for the looming storm, though its focus was slightly different. You see, America had adopted a Germany-first policy. This meant that while the Pacific was certainly a concern, the primary strategic threat was seen as Nazi Germany and its aggression in Europe. Yet, even with this European focus, American military planners were acutely aware of the growing tensions with Japan. They meticulously developed a robust two-front strategy, preparing their forces to be capable of engaging adversaries simultaneously in both the Atlantic and the Pacific theaters. It was a daunting task, requiring immense industrial output and rapid military expansion, a quiet hum of preparation beneath the surface of daily life. And so, you observe, two vast empires, driven by two profoundly conflicting logics and operating under vastly different assumptions, were steadily, inexorably, racing toward an inevitable collision. On one side, Japan, convinced of the necessity of aggressive expansion and the perceived weakness of its foe. On the other, the United States, preparing for a global conflict, yet perhaps underestimating the audacity of Japan's opening move. The air, you can feel it, was thick with unspoken tension, the quiet calm before an unimaginable storm. Everyone knew, implicitly, that the very first strike, the initial, thunderous blow, would not only set the tone but quite possibly decide the ultimate fate of the entire Pacific. The stage was set, the actors were in place, and the curtain was about to rise on a conflict that would change the world forever. The early morning hours of December 7th, 1941. You can almost feel the gentle Hawaiian breeze, taste the salty air, and hear the quiet lapping of waves against the hulls of the ships anchored peacefully in Pearl Harbor. The day was just beginning to unfold, soft and seemingly ordinary. But for Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the brilliant and audacious commander of the Imperial Japanese Navy, this was the moment of his greatest gamble. He knew the risks, he understood the potential consequences, but the fate of his nation, as he saw it, hung precariously in the balance. All of Japan's desperate strategy, its ambition, its very future, was riding on this one, audacious, opening move. Suddenly, the tranquil morning shattered. The quiet hum of daily life was abruptly, violently, replaced by the roar of engines and the terrifying shriek of falling bombs. You hear the distant buzz growing louder, closer, before resolving into the distinct, chilling sound of Japanese aircraft. 353 of them, swarming like an angry hive over the unsuspecting naval base. Imagine the sudden, disorienting chaos. The abrupt transition from peace to utter pandemonium. The sky, moments before clear and blue, was now filled with the metallic gleam of enemy planes, their wings catching the nascent sunlight, reflecting a terrifying new reality. In what felt like mere moments, Pearl Harbor, a symbol of American strength and peace, was transformed into a raging inferno. You can almost taste the acrid smoke, feel the heat of the explosions, hear the cacophony of sirens, gunfire, and human screams. The water, once calm and reflective, boiled with fire and wreckage. It was a scene of unimaginable destruction. The toll was catastrophic, U-3 and 35. American lives were cruelly extinguished that day. Their dreams and futures abruptly halted. Across the base, 160 aircraft were destroyed on the ground, twisted metal scattered like discarded toys. Most devastatingly, 8 of America's mighty battleships, the very symbols of its naval power, were either sunk outright or grievously crippled, left burning and listing in the harbor. The memories of those who survived, those who witnessed this sudden hell, are vivid and haunting. You might hear their voices, echoing through time, describing the horror. The whole foremast was a fireball, one survivor might whisper, his voice raw with memory, recounting the terrifying sight of a battleship engulfed in flames. Another might recall how, in the desperate attempts to fight the fires or rescue comrades, our hands were just raw flesh, a testament to the brutal, unforgiving reality of the inferno that consumed the harbor. These personal accounts paint a stark picture of the sudden, profound shock and the immediate, visceral struggle for survival. Yet, amidst this devastation, there was a quiet, almost miraculous, twist of fate. You learned that the U.S. aircraft carriers, the true, emerging backbone of the Pacific Fleet, those agile and powerful vessels that would prove to be pivotal in the coming struggle, were not in port that fateful day. They were out at sea, on maneuvers or delivering aircraft to distant islands. This absence, a stroke of pure, unexpected luck, meant that the most crucial element of America's naval power remained untouched, ready to fight another day. It was a detail that, in the grand scheme of the war, would prove to be profoundly significant, though unknown to the attackers at the time. In Tokyo, the initial reports brought a surge of triumph and perceived vindication. Japan believed it had delivered a crippling blow, one that would crush American morale and force them to the negotiating table. They thought they had shattered the giant's will. But what they had truly done, you realize, was something far more profound and utterly contrary to their intentions. They had not crushed a spirit. They had awakened a slumbering giant. The shock and devastation of Pearl Harbor did not lead to surrender or even compromise. Instead, it ignited a fierce, unyielding resolve within the American people. As the columns of black smoke continued to rise mournfully over the beautiful Hawaiian landscape, visible for miles, a new, terrible chapter in history opened. The Pacific, once a vast, relatively peaceful expanse, had burst, irrevocably, into total war. In the immediate aftermath of the inferno at Pearl Harbor, you sense a profound shift in the very atmosphere of the Pacific. The initial shock of the attack gave way to a relentless, sweeping surge of Japanese victories across Southeast Asia. It was as if a storm, carefully prepared and meticulously planned, had been unleashed, moving with astonishing speed and overwhelming force. The Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere was no longer a theoretical concept. It was a frightening, tangible reality unfolding with terrifying efficiency. Imagine the news reports, the maps being marked, as you witness, through the lens of history, the rapidity of these conquests. Singapore, once considered an impregnable fortress, the jewel of the British Empire in the East, fell with shocking speed in February 1942. Its surrender was not merely a tactical loss. It was a profound psychological blow, the greatest military defeat in British history. You can almost feel the humiliation, the disbelief, reverberating through London and across the Allied world. The sheer audacity and success of the Japanese assault seemed to defy conventional military wisdom, cementing their reputation for martial prowess and relentless determination. Following swiftly, the sprawling, resource-rich Dutch East Indies, a vast archipelago, also collapsed under the weight of the Japanese offensive. This conquest was strategically vital, delivering into Japan's eager hands the control of essential oil fields in Sumatra and Borneo, crucial for fueling their war machine and fulfilling their quest for self-sufficiency. You see the silent tankers beginning to move, transporting precious crude oil back to the industrial heart of Japan, a tangible representation of their expansionist goals being realized. The sheer scale of these gains was breathtaking, fundamentally altering the geopolitical landscape of the region. But perhaps nowhere was the blow more keenly felt by America than in the Philippines. As you reflect, consider the sheer confidence and speed of the Japanese operations. Half of America's bomber aircraft, stationed defensively on the ground, were destroyed in a single, devastating Japanese raid. A mirror image of the Pearl Harbor attack's surprise and effectiveness. This catastrophic loss crippled American air power in the region, leaving the ground forces vulnerable and exposed. General Douglas MacArthur, the iconic American commander, found himself in an increasingly untenable position. You can imagine the heavy weight of command, the desperate decisions, as he was forced to conduct a strategic retreat with his Filipino and American forces to the rugged, defensible terrain of the Bataan Peninsula and the fortified island of Corregidor. For months, these brave defenders, isolated and outmatched, held out with remarkable resilience, a testament to their courage in the face of overwhelming odds. However, the relentless Japanese pressure eventually proved too great. MacArthur, under direct orders from President Roosevelt, reluctantly escaped to Australia, leaving his forces to face an inevitable, bitter surrender. The aftermath of that surrender became one of the darkest chapters of the war. You hear the whispers of the unspeakable suffering as approximately 80,000 American and Filipino prisoners of war were forced to endure the infamous Bataan Death March. Imagine the searing heat, the crushing thirst, the brutality of their captors, as these exhausted, starved men were driven for miles, a horrifying testament to the barbarity of war. It was a stark, brutal awakening to the true nature of the enemy. Despite the profound despair of the moment, MacArthur's escape to Australia carried with it a powerful, enduring promise. You can almost hear his resolute words, echoing across the vast Pacific, "I shall return." It was more than a statement. It was a vow, a beacon of hope in a time of profound darkness. And the world, reeling from the swift series of Japanese triumphs, instinctively believed him. They held on to that promise, a quiet assurance that, even in the midst of overwhelming defeat, the spirit of resistance had not been broken. The Japanese storm had swept across Asia, but a seed of defiance had already been planted, awaiting its moment to sprout. As Japan's initial wave of conquest settled, you observe the conflict shifting its brutal focus to new, unforgiving landscapes. The vast, dense jungles of Burma became the next theater of war, a theater where nature itself seemed to conspire against humanity. Japan's objective was clear and strategically vital: to invade Burma and, in doing so, sever the last remaining Allied supply line to China, effectively isolating their long-standing adversary. You can almost feel the thick, humid air, heavy with the scent of damp earth and unseen dangers, as soldiers on both sides plunged into this verdant, suffocating labyrinth. This campaign, you understand, was unlike any other. The enemy here wasn't just the opposing soldier, it was the relentless environment itself. Disease, in countless forms, became a more prolific killer than any bullet. Malaria, dysentery, scrub typhus. These unseen foes ravaged entire units, weakening bodies and shattering morale. Then there were the monsoons, an annual deluge that transformed the jungle into a swamp. Roads into rivers of mud, and fighting into a desperate struggle against the elements. You can almost hear the incessant drumming of rain on the canopy, feel the sticky, oppressive humidity, and see the endless, tangled foliage that turned every step into a monumental effort. This was truly a forgotten war of the Pacific, dragging on for years. A quiet, brutal attrition until 1945, far from the dramatic headlines, yet deeply scarring to all who endured it. While the jungle consumed lives in Burma, another, equally significant, front was developing further east. Japanese forces, having consolidated their positions, began their inexorable advance towards New Guinea. You can almost trace their progress on a map, island by island, closer and closer to the vital continent of Australia. The threat was undeniable, palpable, sending shivers of fear through the Australian population. The possibility of invasion, of the war reaching their very shores, became a very real and terrifying prospect. But as this land advance continued, another, even more significant, kind of confrontation was brewing on the vast, blue expanse of the Pacific. You sense the growing tension, the strategic chess game playing out across thousands of miles of ocean. Naval commanders on both sides knew that their fleets, their powerful aircraft carriers, were on a collision course. Soon, a battle would unfold that would be entirely new in the annals of naval warfare. Imagine the immense scale of these fleets, their carriers bristling with aircraft, their support ships forming vast flotillas. Yet, in this coming engagement, these two formidable forces would fight without ever seeing each other. You hear the crackle of radio communications, the reports from scout planes, the distant roar of engines as aircraft launched from unseen decks, flying hundreds of miles to engage an enemy they could not perceive with their own eyes. It was a war of technology, of intelligence, and of aerial prowess, waged over the vast, indifferent ocean. The air above the Coral Sea was about to become the battlefield. This unprecedented confrontation, a harbinger of modern naval warfare, was not merely coming, it was already on the horizon. Slowly, silently, moving towards its appointed, cataclysmic hour. The stage was set, and the vast expanse of the Coral Sea became the theater for a new kind of warfare. In May 1942, you witnessed the unfolding of what would become the first carrier-to-carrier battle in history. Imagine the ships, miles apart, their powerful guns silent, their strength projected through the air by waves of planes. The Battle of the Coral Sea was a brutal, complex dance of naval aviation, where success hinged on intelligence, timing, and the skill of pilots. From a tactical standpoint, Japan could claim a victory. The U.S. Navy sustained heavier losses in ships. However, as you observe the broader implications, you realize this was a strategic halt for the Japanese. Their southward advance, aimed at New Guinea and ultimately Australia, was decisively turned back. More critically, for the future of the war. The Coral Sea inflicted a quiet, yet profound, wound on Japan's naval air arm. Two of their precious aircraft carriers, the Shokaku and the Zuikaku, suffered significant damage. One was severely hit and taken out of action, while the other lost so many irreplaceable veteran aircraft and aircrew that it, too, was rendered ineffective for the crucial engagement that was to follow. You can almost sense the missed opportunity, the strategic error that would echo across the Pacific. This weakening, this quiet subtraction of naval power, would prove to be a fatal precursor for what was about to come. Just a month later, in June 1942, the true turning point arrived with the Battle of Midway. You imagine the intense, almost frantic Boston work of American intelligence officers, poring over intercepted Japanese communications. In a quiet triumph of code breaking and analysis, the U.S. gained a critical advantage. They knew Japan's plans. They knew the target, Midway Atoll, and they knew the approximate timing. This foreknowledge allowed the U.S. Pacific Fleet, still recovering from Pearl Harbor, to set a devastating ambush. Imagine the hushed tension on the American carriers, the meticulous preparations, the knowledge that they held a secret that could decide the war. When the Japanese attack waves launched on Midway, you see the intricate deception at play, as the Japanese planes returned to their carriers to rearm and refuel. American dive bombers, having flown unnoticed through gaps in the Japanese air cover, suddenly appeared. The timing was catastrophic for Japan. Their carrier decks were cluttered with fueled aircraft, bombs, and torpedoes, making them extraordinarily vulnerable. The devastation was swift and absolute. In a single, horrifying day, 4 of Japan's most powerful aircraft carriers, the Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, were utterly destroyed. You can almost feel the shockwaves of these losses ripple across the ocean, a profound seismic shift in naval power. The destruction of these carriers was not just the loss of ships. It was the annihilation of the very heart of Japan's naval power. With them went hundreds of irreplaceable aircraft and, more critically, hundreds of highly trained, veteran pilots, and aircrew. This was a blow from which the Imperial Japanese Navy would never fully recover. The myth of Japanese invincibility, a pervasive and demoralizing belief that had taken root after their swift conquests, vanished beneath the waves of Midway. You sense the profound psychological impact, the crushing realization that their grand gamble had failed in the most spectacular and devastating way. Midway marked the true, undeniable turning point of the Pacific War. From that moment forward, you understand, the strategic initiative irrevocably passed from Japan to the United States and its allies. Japan would never again regain the upper hand, never again launch the massive, sweeping offensives that had characterized the early months of the war. Instead, they would be forced onto the defensive, reacting to Allied moves, their grand ambitions slowly, agonizingly, beginning to unravel. The tide had turned, slowly but decisively, and the long, brutal path to ultimate victory for the Allies had finally begun. Following the pivotal victory at Midway, you sense a palpable shift in the Allied strategy. The time for defense was over. The time for offense had arrived. In August 1942, the U.S. military launched its very first major offensive of the war in the Pacific, the invasion of Guadalcanal, a seemingly insignificant island in the Solomon chain. You can almost feel the humid, oppressive air, thick with the scent of unfamiliar jungle foliage. As the first waves of Marines stormed ashore, this was not a swift, surgical strike. It was the beginning of a relentless, grinding struggle that would test the very limits of human endurance. For 6 relentless months, Guadalcanal became an island of blood, a crucible where American and Japanese forces clashed with unimaginable ferocity. You can almost hear the incessant chatter of machine guns, the screams of artillery, and the chilling sounds of hand-to-hand combat echoing through the dense jungle. But the enemy here was not just the Japanese soldier. The tropical environment proved to be as deadly, if not more so, than any weapon. Soldiers faced unimaginable hunger, their rations scarce and supplies often cut off. Disease, particularly malaria and dysentery, ravaged the ranks, weakening men faster than combat. You might imagine the constant buzzing of mosquitoes, the pervasive dampness, the feeling of sweat and grime clinging to every inch of skin, making existence a constant battle against the elements. This was a war against an invisible enemy, a psychological torment as much as a physical one. The Japanese defenders, deeply entrenched and masters of jungle warfare, launched fierce, often suicidal, night attacks, adding to the constant dread. You might almost feel the isolation, the fear, as men tried to snatch a few hours of sleep amidst the relentless sounds of the jungle and the constant threat of attack. Stories emerged of men drowning in the thick, viscous mud, succumbing to the madness brought on by exhaustion, disease, and the sheer terror of continuous combat. Guadalcanal stripped away any romantic notions of war, revealing its brutal, dehumanizing core. When the island finally fell to Allied forces in February 1943, the Japanese aura of dominance, already dented at Midway, was utterly shattered. You sense the profound psychological impact of this defeat. For the first time, Japanese forces had been forced to retreat from an island they had fought so fiercely to hold. This moment marked a fundamental shift in the Japanese military mindset. From then on, you understand, many Japanese soldiers fought not with the expectation of victory, but with a grim, unwavering resolve to die with honor, preferring a suicidal charge to the shame of surrender. This shift would define the brutal island-hopping campaigns that followed. And indeed, Guadalcanal laid the groundwork for America's strategic approach to the rest of the Pacific War, the island-hopping strategy. You visualize the vast map of the Pacific, dotted with countless islands, each a potential fortress. The idea was not to conquer every single Japanese-held island, but to bypass the heavily fortified, less strategically important ones, isolating them and letting them wither on the vine. Instead, Allied forces would focus on seizing key islands, one bloody, hard-fought step at a time, establishing airfields and naval bases from which to launch the next assault. It was a methodical, grinding advance, inching closer and closer to the Japanese homeland. The names of the next stepping stones. You hear them whispered with a grim certainty: Saipan, Leyte Gulf, Iwo Jima, Okinawa. Each a symbol of an even more brutal confrontation yet to come. As the war progressed, you sensed the inexorable, bloody march of the island-hopping strategy drawing ever closer to Japan's home islands. Each island conquered was a step forward, but also a testament to the escalating ferocity of the Japanese defense. By 1944, the fighting had reached Saipan, a crucial island in the Mariana Chain, strategically vital for establishing airfields from which American B-29 bombers could directly strike Japan. You can almost hear the roar of the planes, the distant thud of naval bombardments, as the invasion began. The battle for Saipan was exceptionally brutal. In a desperate, final banzai attack, over 300 Japanese soldiers launched a suicidal charge against American lines. A stark and harrowing display of their fight-to-the-death ethos. Even more tragically, thousands of Japanese civilians, many fearing American atrocities due to propaganda, chose to jump from the island's towering cliffs rather than surrender. You feel the profound sadness, the desperation of such an extreme act. Shortly after Saipan, in October 1944, came the colossal Battle of Leyte Gulf, widely recognized as the largest naval battle in history. Imagine fleets of hundreds of ships clashing across a vast stretch of ocean in the Philippines. This was Japan's last, desperate gamble to stop the American advance and protect its vital supply lines from Southeast Asia. The battle was a maelstrom of naval power, a chaotic and devastating engagement involving carrier aircraft, battleships, cruisers, and destroyers. When the smoke cleared, Japan's navy, already weakened, was all but annihilated. Its capacity to project power across the Pacific was effectively gone, leaving the home islands increasingly vulnerable. Amidst this monumental naval clash, a powerful moment of symbolic justice unfolded. General Douglas MacArthur, having escaped the Philippines years earlier with his famous vow, made good on his promise. You can almost see him wading ashore at Leyte, proclaiming with unwavering conviction, "By the grace of Almighty God, I have returned." His words, broadcast globally, were a beacon of hope and a powerful validation of the Allied cause, marking the liberation of the Philippines and a profound turning point in the war's narrative. Yet, the nearer the Allied forces came to Japan, the more fanatical and costly the resistance became. In February 1945, the Marines landed on Iwo Jima, a tiny volcanic island, less than 8 square miles, yet strategically critical for its airfields. You might imagine the stark, black volcanic sand, the labyrinthine network of tunnels and bunkers carved into the island's rock, making every inch of progress a deadly struggle. The Japanese defenders, dug in deep, fought from subterranean strongholds with unwavering resolve. When the fighting finally ceased, over 17,000 Japanese soldiers had died, virtually the entire garrison. But America, too, suffered staggering losses, with over 600 Marines killed and nearly 20,000 wounded. It was a chilling preview of what an invasion of Japan itself might entail. The iconic image of the American flag being raised on Mount Suribachi became an enduring symbol of courage, sacrifice, and the relentless, grinding cost of victory for a generation. The final, and perhaps most brutal, island battle of the Pacific War unfolded on Okinawa, beginning in April 1945. You can almost feel the exhaustion, the mounting dread, as American forces embarked on what would be a 3-month-long slaughter. Okinawa was considered the gateway to Japan, only 340 miles from the main islands. Here, the Japanese defense was even more entrenched, integrating the entire civilian population into the defense effort. The fighting was vicious, characterized by massed kamikaze attacks against the Allied fleet, terrifying banzai charges, and house-to-house combat against a foe who would not surrender. The cost was immense, over 200,000 casualties on both sides, with entire families wiped out in the brutal fighting. You hear the echoes of the screams, the terror of civilians caught in the crossfire, the sheer ferocity of this resistance, the willingness of the Japanese to fight literally to the last man, convinced American strategists of a terrifying truth: a direct invasion of Japan itself would be suicidal, costing millions of Allied lives and prolonging the war indefinitely. A different, more terrible solution was now being sought. As the spring of 1945 deepened, you feel a profound sense of grim inevitability settling over Japan. The island-hopping campaign had brought the war to their very doorstep, and the skies over their cities, once relatively safe, now pulsed with a terrifying new threat. In March 1945, a new kind of terror descended the firebomb raids on Tokyo. Imagine the sheer scale of the attack. Hundreds of B-29 Superfortress bombers, flying in low, dropping incendiary bombs that created massive firestorms in the densely packed wooden structures of the city. You might almost smell the burning wood and flesh, feel the intense heat radiating from the inferno. In a single, horrific night, over 100,000 civilians perished, a casualty count rivaling that of future atomic blasts. Tokyo burned, a stark and horrifying testament to the brutal escalation of the war. Japan was, by this point, a nation on the brink of collapse. You see the widespread devastation, the bombed-out factories, the desperate faces of a populace suffering under immense hardship. They were starved, their food supplies dwindling due to an effective Allied naval blockade. Their industries were broken, their cities reduced to rubble. Yet, even in this state of utter devastation, the leadership in Tokyo, clinging to a fervent code of honor and an almost delusional hope, stubbornly refused to surrender unconditionally. They hoped for a negotiated peace, clinging to the slim chance of preserving the imperial system, even if it meant fighting to the last man, woman, and child. You feel the profound tragedy of a nation trapped between its rigid honor code and the brutal reality of its defeat. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away, in a secrecy so profound it verged on the mythical, the Manhattan Project neared its terrifying completion. You can almost feel the quiet intensity in those laboratories and test sites. The brilliant minds working tirelessly on a weapon of unprecedented power. The scientific marvel, born of incredible human ingenuity, was poised to unleash a force never before seen by humanity. The world, unknowingly, stood on the precipice of a new, horrifying era. The decision was made. On August 6, 1945, the course of human history irrevocably changed. You imagine the lone B-29, the Enola Gay, flying high over the city of Hiroshima. Then, a single bomb, unlike any before it, was released. In a flash of unimaginable brilliance and heat, Hiroshima vanished, a searing, blinding light, a mushroom cloud rising thousands of feet into the sky, marked the dawn of the atomic age. The city below became an instant wasteland, its inhabitants vaporized or grievously wounded, their lives ended or forever altered by the terrifying power of the atom. The sheer scale of destruction, the instantaneous nature of the devastation, was beyond comprehension. Just 3 days later, on August 9th, as the world still reeled from Hiroshima, a second sun rose, even more terribly, over the city of Nagasaki. The second atomic bomb was dropped, unleashing its destructive force on another Japanese city, reinforcing the terrifying new reality of warfare. The message was clear, stark, and horrifying. The destruction would continue, relentlessly, until surrender. And on that very same day, as the atomic bombs shattered Japan's cities, another massive military force entered the fray. The Soviet Union, having declared war on Japan, launched a swift and overwhelming invasion of Manchuria, crushing Japan's last significant army on the Asian mainland. You can almost hear the rumble of Soviet tanks, the roar of their aircraft, overwhelming the depleted and demoralized Japanese forces. Facing utter extinction, confronted by an enemy wielding unprecedented weapons and another invading from the north, the Empire's final illusion of resistance, its stubborn refusal to yield, finally collapsed. The quiet pride and the fierce resolve that had driven Japan for so long were finally, definitively, broken. The weight of unimaginable destruction, the prospect of total annihilation, finally brought the war to its painful, inevitable conclusion. On August 14th, 1945, you hear the quiet, yet seismic announcement. Emperor Hirohito, in an unprecedented move, addressed his people directly, breaking the silence of his divine status. His voice, carried over radio waves, ordered the unconditional surrender of the Empire of Japan. Imagine the mix of relief, shock, and profound sadness that would have washed over the Japanese populace. A lifetime of imperial dogma dissolving in a single broadcast. The Empire of the Rising Sun, once feared across Asia, a formidable power that had dreamed of a vast dominion, now lay utterly in ashes, its grand ambitions consumed by the very fires it had ignited. The cost of this war, you reflect, was staggering, almost beyond human comprehension. Over 3 million Japanese lives were lost, the vast majority of them civilians. Innocent people caught in a maelstrom of conflict, starvation, and fire. The very fabric of their society was torn apart, their cities laid waste, their future uncertain. For the United States, too, the cost was immense, though comparatively less. Approximately 110,000 American troops paid the ultimate sacrifice, their lives given in a brutal, distant war. Yet, from the ashes of conflict, America emerged fundamentally transformed, not only as a global superpower, but as the undisputed master of the Pacific, its naval and air power dominant, its influence stretching across vast oceans. But the end of the Pacific War was more than just the defeat of one empire and the rise of another. you sense a profound geopolitical shift echoing across the entire Asian continent. Across Asia, the colonial nations, long under the subjugation of European powers, began to stir. The myth of Western invincibility had been irrevocably broken by Japan's early victories, even though Japan itself had been defeated. Independence movements, previously suppressed or nascent, were now ignited with renewed fervor. The quiet longing for self-determination, for an end to centuries of colonial rule, burst forth with renewed energy, setting in motion a wave of decolonization that would reshape the global map for decades to come. And from the ruins of Hiroshima, from the devastating flash that had brought the war to its abrupt end, a new world order was indeed born. The atomic age had begun, forever altering the calculus of global power and the very nature of conflict. You feel the profound sense of change, the understanding that humanity had crossed a threshold, entering an era where its destructive capabilities could truly threaten its own existence. The Pacific War, with its incredible sacrifice and monumental struggles, had finally ended, bringing with it a profound sense of closure and an exhausted hope for peace. Yet, you also sense the subtle, growing chill in the global air, the shifting alignments, the ideological divides beginning to form. For even as the last shots of the Pacific War faded, the quiet, insidious tension of the Cold War was just beginning to cast its long, uncertain shadow over the nascent peace. And perhaps, somewhere in that silence, a new story, a new kind of struggle, was already unfolding, waiting for its turn to be told.